I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, when I saw the red and blue lights flashing through my window. My heart dropped into my stomach as I watched 3 police cruisers pull into my driveway. What the hell? I rushed to the front door, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Had something happened to my wife? My kids? Was there a break-in I didn't know about? But when I opened the door, the lead officer looked just as confused as I felt. "Sir, are you Marcus Henderson?" he asked, glancing down at his notepad. "Yes, that's me. What's going on? Is everyone okay? We received a 911 call about, well, this is a bit unusual. Apparently you've created a dangerous obstruction to public safety by closing your gate." I stared at him, blinking slowly. My gate. Behind the officer, I could see her, Linda Fitzgerald, the HOA president, standing at the edge of my property with her arms crossed and that smug, satisfied smile plastered across her face. She was actually recording this with her phone. "Officer," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. "This is my private property. That gate has been there for 15 years. I close it every night for my livestock's safety." But even as I explained, I knew this wasn't really about a gate. This was about something much bigger, something that had been building for months. Linda Fitzgerald had made it clear from day one that she wanted me gone, and apparently, she was willing to weaponize the police to do it. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 1. What I didn't know yet was just how far she was willing to go to destroy my family's peace, and how much it would cost all of us before this nightmare was over. Let me back up and tell you how this all started, because to understand the insanity of what happened, you need to know what my life was like before Linda Fitzgerald turned it into a living hell. My name is Marcus Henderson, and 18 months ago, my wife Sarah and I thought we'd found paradise. After 23 years of living in cramped suburbs, saving every penny, we finally had enough to buy our dream property. 12 acres of beautiful rolling hills and Sunset Ridge Estates, just outside of Austin, Texas. The property came with a charming 3-bedroom ranch house, a red barn that needed some work, and most importantly to me, enough space to finally pursue my lifelong dream of raising heritage cattle. I'd grown up on my grandfather's ranch, and those were some of the happiest memories of my childhood. The smell of hay in the morning, the gentle lowing of cattle, the satisfaction of working the land with your own hands. Sarah was just as excited as I was. She'd been dreaming of having a big garden, maybe some chickens, space for our kids to really run and play. Our daughter, Emma, was 12 and our son Jake was 9, and we wanted them to experience the kind of childhood we'd had, connected to the land, with real responsibilities, and the freedom that only comes from wide open spaces. When we first toured the neighborhood, everything seemed perfect. The houses were beautiful, well-maintained, set on large lots with plenty of privacy. The HOA documents we received seemed reasonable enough, standard stuff about keeping properties neat, no business vehicles parked on the street, that sort of thing. Nothing that seemed like it would interfere with our plans. Our realtor, Tom, had mentioned that the HOA was pretty active, but assured us it was just concerned homeowners who wanted to maintain property values. "You'll love it here," he'd said. "It's like a little slice of heaven." Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 2. For the first 6 months, it really was heaven. I spent weekends repairing the barn, building new fencing, and researching the best heritage cattle breeds for our climate. Sarah planted her garden and started talking to neighbors about maybe starting a weekend farmer's market. The kids adapted to their new school and made friends quickly. The only HOA interaction we'd had was a welcome basket from Linda Fitzgerald, the HOA president. She was a petite woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought us homemade cookies and a folder full of helpful information about the neighborhood. "Welcome to Sunset Ridge," she'd said, standing on our front porch in her pristine white tennis outfit. We're so excited to have new neighbors. This is such a special community. We all work very hard to maintain the character and values that make this place so wonderful. I remember thinking she seemed nice enough, maybe a little intense, but harmless. Sarah and I had laughed later about how she'd lingered, asking lots of questions about our plans for the property. She'd seemed particularly interested when I mentioned the cattle. Cattle, she'd repeated, her smile flickering for just a moment. How interesting. I'm sure you'll want to check the HOA guidelines about livestock. I'd assured her we would, though I wasn't worried. The property was zoned agricultural, and when we'd bought it, there were already cattle living on it. The previous owners, the Johnsons, had run a small herd for over a decade without any issues. But looking back now, I can see that flicker in Linda's smile for what it really was. The moment she realized she had a problem to solve. And Linda Fitzgerald, as I would soon learn, was the kind of person who didn't just solve problems, she eliminated them entirely. The first sign of trouble came in March, about 8 months after we'd moved in. I just brought home my first 3 Highland cattle, beautiful, docile animals with gorgeous long hair that made them look like gentle giants. I was so proud, taking pictures to send to my grandfather, feeling like I was finally living the life I'd dreamed of. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 3. That's when I got my first letter from the HOA. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail. Sarah brought it in with the rest of the mail, frowning at the official-looking envelope. Henderson family. She read from the return address. Sunset Ridge Estates. Homeowners Association. Violation notice. My blood ran cold as I tore open the envelope. The letter was typed on official letterhead, signed by Linda Fitzgerald in her capacity as HOA president. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that you have introduced livestock to your property without proper approval. According to Section 4.7 of the HOA, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CC and RS, any livestock must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee prior to placement on the property. You have 30 days to remove the animals or face fines of $100 per day until the violation is corrected. Please contact the HOA office to discuss compliance. Sincerely, Linda Fitzgerald, HOA President. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. This is insane, I told Sarah. The Johnsons had cattle here for years. The property is zoned agricultural. We bought this place specifically because we could have livestock. Sarah took the letter from me, reading it again. What's Section 4.7? Do we have a copy of these CC and RS? We spent the next 2 hours digging through our closing documents, looking for the HOA covenants. When we finally found them, buried in a stack of paperwork, 3 inches thick, I felt my heart sink. There it was, in tiny print on page 47. All livestock, including but not limited to horses, cattle, goats, sheep, and swine, must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 4. How did we miss this? Sarah asked, though we both knew the answer. The document was deliberately dense and confusing, clearly designed to hide important restrictions in a maze of legal language. I called Tom, our realtor, but he was less than helpful. Look, Marcus, he said over the phone. I'm sorry this is happening, but you really should have read all the documents more carefully. The HOA has every right to enforce their rules. But the previous owners had cattle. That was probably grandfathered in. Or maybe the HOA just wasn't as active back then. That afternoon, I drove over to Linda Fitzgerald's house. She lived in a massive colonial at the front of the neighborhood, with perfectly manicured gardens and not a blade of grass out of place. When she answered the door, she was wearing another tennis outfit and that same fake smile. Marcus, how nice to see you. I assume this is about our letter. Linda, I need to understand something. The Johnsons had cattle on my property for over 10 years. Why is this suddenly a problem? Her smile never wavered. Well, that was a different board, a different time. We're much more committed now to maintaining the high standards that our homeowners expect. Livestock can be problematic. Smells, noise, property, values. I'm sure you understand. My cattle are quiet and well maintained. The property is agricultural zoned. This seems like... Marcus, she interrupted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. The rules are the rules. You can apply for approval through the proper channels, but I should warn you, the board takes these matters very seriously. We have to think about what's best for the entire community. I left her house with my jaw clenched, knowing I'd just been given a threat, disguised as advice. The next month was a nightmare of bureaucracy. I submitted a formal application to the Architectural Review Committee, including detailed plans for fencing, waste management, and noise control. I provided veterinary records showing my animals. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 5. We're healthy and up to date on all vaccinations. I even got letters of support from 3 neighbors who said they had no objection to the cattle. The committee denied my application without explanation. When I appealed, asking for specific reasons, they denied the appeal. When I requested to attend a board meeting to present my case in person, Linda informed me that livestock matters were handled in executive session and homeowners weren't permitted to attend. Meanwhile, the fines started piling up. $100 per day, every single day. By the end of April, I owed the HOA $3,000. But that was just the beginning of Linda's campaign against us. In May, I received a citation for excessive noise because my cattle apparently mooed too early in the morning. When I pointed out that roosters were crowing all over the neighborhood at the same time, I was told that chickens were traditional farm animals while cattle were commercial livestock. In June, I was cited for unsightly fencing because I'd installed agricultural fencing around my pasture. The HOA demanded I replace it with aesthetically appropriate decorative fencing that would have cost $15,000 and been completely useless for containing cattle. In July, Linda herself called the county code enforcement office, claiming I was running an illegal commercial operation. I spent an entire day dealing with inspectors who ultimately found no violations, but the stress was eating away at our family's peace of mind. Sarah started having anxiety attacks. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, worried about what new citation would arrive in the mail. Emma and Jake began asking why we were getting so many angry letters, and I didn't know how to explain to them that sometimes adults could be unreasonable bullies. The worst part was watching the community turn against us. Linda had been busy spreading rumors, telling neighbors that we were lowering property values and disrupting the peaceful character of the neighborhood. People who had welcomed us with smiles 8 months earlier now crossed the street to avoid talking to us. By August, we'd received 17 different citations. The fines had grown to over $8,000. Our lawyer, yes, we'd had to hire a lawyer, told us that the HOA was within their legal rights, even if their enforcement seemed targeted and unreasonable. You could fight this in court, he said, but it would cost more than just paying the fines and getting rid of the cattle. These HOA cases can drag on for years. That night, Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table, looking at the stack of violation notices and legal bills. Maybe we should just give up, she said quietly. Sell the cattle, pay the fines, try to move on. I stared out the window at my 3 Highland cattle, peacefully grazing in the evening light. These animals represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of. Giving them up felt like giving up a piece of my soul. No, I said finally. This isn't about the cattle anymore. This is about bullies, thinking they can destroy our family because they don't like us. If we give in now, what's next? Our garden? Our kids playing outside? Where does it end? Sarah nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. So what do we do? That's when I made the decision that would change everything. We fight back, but we're going to do it smart. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the county courthouse. If Linda Fitzgerald wanted to play hardball, I was going to learn the rules of the game. I spent 6 hours in the records office, pulling every document I could find related to Sunset Ridge Estates, HOA bylaws, board meeting minutes, financial records, architectural approvals, correspondence with the county. Everything was public. Record if you knew where to look. What I found made my blood boil. Linda Fitzgerald had been systematically targeting anyone in the neighborhood who didn't fit her vision of appropriate residence. In the past 3 years, she'd driven out a young Hispanic family by citing them for excessive vehicle noise. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 7. They drove a motorcycle to work. An elderly widow by claiming her flower garden violated landscape standards, and a veteran with PTSD by repeatedly calling the police for noise complaints when his service dog barked. But the most shocking discovery was in the financial records. Linda had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, landscaping for her own property, meals at expensive restaurants charged as board meetings, even a $3,000 payment to her son's lawn care business for work that was never performed. She wasn't just a bully. She was embezzling from the homeowners she was supposed to serve. I made copies of everything and drove straight to the office of Amanda Chun, a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Amanda was in her 40s, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. "Mr. Henderson," she said after reviewing my documents, "this is a goldmine. Financial impropriety, selective enforcement, harassment. You have grounds for both civil and criminal complaints. What does that mean for us?" "It means you don't just fight back, you take them down. But I have to warn you, this could get ugly. Linda Fitzgerald strikes me as someone who won't go quietly." That evening, I called an emergency meeting with some of our neighbors. I'd identified several homeowners who had been targeted by the HOA over the years, people who might be willing to stand up if they knew they weren't alone. Tom and Janet Morrison came. They'd been cited for having the wrong color mailbox. David Kim, who'd been fighting a citation for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Maria Santos, the young mother who'd been harassed for having too many non-native plants in her front yard. We met in our barn, sitting on hay bales, while my cattle watched curiously from their stalls. "I know we've all been dealing with HOA harassment individually," I began, "but I think it's time we stood together." I showed them what I discovered about Linda's financial misconduct and selective enforcement patterns. The anger in the room was palpable. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 8, that which cost me $2,000 in legal fees. Tom said, all because my mailbox was forest green instead of hunter green. I had to bring in paint samples to prove they were the same color. "She made me replant my entire front yard," Maria added. "Said my roses weren't appropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. I spent my kids' vacation money on new plants." By the end of the meeting, we had 7 families willing to join a coordinated response. Amanda Chin agreed to represent us as a group, and we developed a 3-pronged strategy. First, we would file a formal complaint with the Texas Attorney General's office about the financial impropriety. Second, we would demand a special homeowners meeting to remove Linda from the board. Third, if necessary, we would file a federal civil rights lawsuit claiming harassment and selective enforcement. But Linda, it turned out, wasn't going to wait for us to execute our plan. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange notice posted on my front gate. Condemnation notice, property deemed unsafe for human habitation. According to the notice, the county health department had received complaints about unsanitary conditions created by my livestock, and the property was being condemned pending a full inspection. I called the number on the notice immediately. "Sir," the clerk told me, "we received multiple complaints about animal waste, contamination, and potential groundwater pollution. An inspector will be out tomorrow morning." "Multiple complaints? From who?" I'm sorry, sir, but complaint information is confidential. That night, I walked my property with a flashlight, documenting every square inch. My pastures were clean, my animals healthy, my water sources pristine. Whatever Linda was claiming, it was complete fabrication. The inspector arrived the next morning, a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed annoyed to be there. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 9. Mr. Henderson, I'm here about the livestock contamination complaints. Of course, I'd be happy to show you around. We spent 2 hours walking the property. The inspector tested water sources, examined waste management systems, checked the condition of the animals. Finally, he closed his notebook and shook his head. Mr. Henderson, I've got to tell you, this is one of the cleanest livestock operations I've ever seen. Your animals are clearly well cared for. Your waste management is textbook perfect, and there's absolutely no contamination of any kind. So the complaints were false, completely fabricated. Whoever called this and was either seriously misinformed or deliberately lying. I'll have the condemnation notice lifted by this afternoon. He paused, looking uncomfortable. Between you and me, I've been getting a lot of calls from your neighborhood lately, all from the same woman, all completely bogus. You might want to document this pattern. That's when I realized Linda had made a crucial mistake. She'd escalated from HOA harassment to filing false reports with government agencies. That wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I called Amanda Chin immediately. She just handed us the smoking gun. Amanda said, filing false reports with the health department is a misdemeanor. Combined with the financial evidence, we can have her removed from the board and possibly face criminal charges. But even as I felt hope for the first time in months, I had no idea how desperate Linda was about to become, or how far she would go to destroy us before we could destroy her. The showdown came 2 weeks later, and it was even more dramatic than I could have imagined. We'd successfully petitioned for a special homeowners meeting to address serious concerns about board conduct and financial management. Amanda, Crazy HOA Karen, called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 10. Chin had filed the complaint with the Attorney General's office. The momentum was on our side, and Linda knew it. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday in the community center. As I drove there with Sarah, I could see cars packed into the parking lot, more homeowners than I'd ever seen at an HOA gathering. Inside, the tension was electric. Linda sat at the front table with the other board members, her usual smile replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Her supporters, mostly wealthy retirees from the front of the neighborhood, clustered on one side of the room. Our growing coalition of affected homeowners sat on the other side. Amanda Chin sat in the front row with a thick folder of documents. Linda called the meeting to order with visible reluctance. This special meeting has been called to address certain unfounded accusations against the board. Before we begin, I want to make it clear that this association has always operated with the highest standards of integrity and... Point of order, Amanda Chin interrupted, standing up. Under the association bylaws, homeowners have the right to present evidence of board misconduct before any board statements. Linda's face flushed red. Ms. Chin, you are not a homeowner and have no standing to. I'm here as the legal representative of 12 homeowners, Amanda replied, calmly. Under Texas Property Code Section 209.0056, I have every right to address this meeting. For the next 30 minutes, Amanda systematically presented our evidence. Financial records showing misappropriation of funds, documentation of selective enforcement against minority families and working-class homeowners, the pattern of false government reports. The room was dead silent as she spoke. I watched faces in the crowd changing, from confusion to shock to outrage. These were people who had trusted Linda, who had believed her claims about maintaining property values and community standards. When Amanda finished, she placed a thick stack of documents on the table. I'm submitting a formal motion for the immediate removal of Linda Fitzgerald as HOA Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 11. President, pending a full forensic audit of association finances. Linda shot to her feet. This is absolutely ridiculous. These are lies and fabrications from a disgruntled homeowner who refuses to follow community standards. Then you won't mind the audit? Amanda asked sweetly. That's when Linda made the mistake that ended everything. These people, she said, pointing at our group, don't belong in this neighborhood. They're bringing down property values with their livestock and they're kind of people. Her voice was rising, her composure completely gone. We built this community for families who understand quality and standards, not for people who want to turn it into some kind of farmyard. The racism and classism in her words hung in the air like poison. I saw several of her own supporters look away in embarrassment. Tom Morrison stood up. Linda, I've lived here for 8 years. I've served on committees, paid my dues, followed every rule. But what you just said, that's not who we are. One by one, homeowners began standing up. Janet Morrison, David Kim, Maria Santos, even some people I'd never met, people who had been sitting on Linda's side of the room. I motioned for an immediate vote of no confidence, called out Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had been one of Linda's strongest supporters. Seconded, came voices from around the room. Linda looked around desperately. You can't do this. I've devoted years of my life to this community. I've protected your property values. Ma'am, Amanda Chun interrupted. You've embezzled approximately $47,000 in association funds over 3 years. The Attorney General's office has already opened an investigation. That's when Linda completely lost it. Fine, she screamed, her face bright red. You want this neighborhood to go to hell. You want property values to crash? You'll see what happens when there's no one maintaining standards. She stormed toward the exit, but turned back one more time. This isn't over. Henderson, I'll make sure you regret this. The vote to remove her was 47-3. But Linda wasn't finished with us yet. The next morning, I was feeding my cattle when I heard sirens again. This time it wasn't just police cars. There were fire trucks, an ambulance, and what looked like a hazmat team. I ran toward the gate, my heart pounding. Had something happened to Sarah? The kids? The lead firefighter met me at the fence. Sir, we received a 911 call reporting a chemical spill and possible explosion at this address. The caller said there were toxic fumes and potential casualties. I stared at him in disbelief. Captain, there's no chemical spill, no explosion, no toxic fumes. Someone called in a false report. The hazmat team spent an hour testing the air and soil around our property. The fire chief looked increasingly annoyed as it became clear they'd been sent on a wild goose chase. Sir, he said finally, whoever called this and is going to face serious charges. Filing false emergency reports is a felony. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I was about to answer when I saw her, Linda Fitzgerald, standing across the street, with her phone out, recording everything. When she saw me looking at her, she didn't even try to hide. She just smiled that same cold smile and walked away. Her, I said, pointing. Linda Fitzgerald. She's been harassing my family for months. The fire chief nodded grimly. We'll be filing a report with the police. This kind of thing ties up emergency resources that could be needed for real emergencies. That afternoon, Detective Rodriguez came to our house to take a statement. Linda had apparently called 911 claiming that I had created a dangerous obstruction to public safety by closing my ranch gate, that there were toxic chemicals on my crazy HOA. Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 13 property, and that there had been an explosion that might have injured neighbors. All of it was completely fabricated. Mr. Henderson, Detective Rodriguez said, this woman has called 911 6 times in the past 2 weeks with false reports about your property. That's not just harassment, It's criminal misuse of emergency services. 2 days later, I watched from my kitchen window as police cars pulled into Linda's driveway. They arrested her on charges of filing false police reports, criminal mischief, and misuse of emergency services. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs should have felt like victory, but honestly, I just felt tired. Tired and sad that it had taken so much pain and stress to get to this point. But the real victory came a week later, when the new interim HOA board, led by Tom Morrison, voted unanimously to approve my cattle and formally apologize for the harassment our family had endured. They also voted to pursue full restitution of the embezzled funds and to implement new policies preventing selective enforcement. 6 months have passed since Linda Fitzgerald was arrested, and life in Sunset Ridge Estates has finally settled into something resembling peace. Linda pled guilty to the criminal charges and was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, and full restitution of the $47,000 she'd embezzled. The civil lawsuit we filed resulted in an additional settlement that covered all our legal fees and the stress our family endured. More importantly, she was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board and from living in Sunset Ridge Estates. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks after her conviction. The new HOA board, led by Tom Morrison, has transformed the community. They implemented a transparent approval process, published all meeting minutes online, and created an appeal system for any homeowner who feels they've been unfairly targeted. Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 14. They also established a neighborhood character committee that focuses on celebrating the diversity of our community rather than enforcing rigid conformity. Maria Santos now leads a community garden project. David Kim organized a neighborhood watch that actually brings people together instead of dividing them. My cattle are thriving. I've expanded the herd to 8 animals, and several neighbors bring their kids over on weekends to learn about farm life. What Linda saw as a threat to property values has actually become one of the neighborhood's most beloved features. Sarah's anxiety has gradually faded, though she still gets nervous when official-looking mail arrives. Emma and Jake learned valuable lessons about standing up to bullies and the importance of community solidarity. They're both involved in 4-H now, helping to care for the cattle and learning responsibility. But the experience changed me in ways I'm still processing. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to be protecting community values are actually destroying the very things that make a community worth living in. Kindness, tolerance, mutual support. These are maintained by rigid rules and aggressive enforcement. They're cultivated by people who choose to see their neighbors as fellow human beings rather than potential threats. I also learned something about the nature of bullies. Linda Fitzgerald wasn't evil. Exactly. She was afraid. Afraid of change, afraid of difference, afraid of losing control over the small world she'd built for herself. That fear made her cruel, but understanding it helped me find compassion, even for someone who had caused my family so much pain. The most important lesson, though, was about the power of community. When people stand together against injustice, when they support each other through difficult times, they become stronger than any bully or corrupt system. Our little coalition of targeted homeowners has evolved into a genuine friendship network. We have regular barbecues, help each other with projects, and watch out for each other's families. We've created the kind of community that Linda claimed to want but was actually preventing through her authoritarian approach. Sometimes, late in the evening, I stand on my porch and listen to my cattle settling down for the night. The Highland bulls make these deep, contented sounds that Crazy HOA Karen called 911 because I closed MY Ranch Gate 15 seemed to echo across the hills. Sarah works in her garden while the kids play in the yard, and neighbors wave as they walk their dogs past our gate. This is what Linda Fitzgerald almost destroyed with her petty tyranny and manufactured crises. This peace, this contentment, this sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. But she didn't destroy it. In fact, by forcing us to fight for it. She may have made it stronger. The gate that started this whole nightmare still stands at the entrance to our property. I open it every morning and close it every evening, just as I always have. But now it means something different to me. It's not just a barrier to keep my cattle safe. It's a symbol of our right to live as we choose, to pursue our dreams without interference from those who would impose their vision of perfection on everyone else. Linda Fitzgerald called 911 because I closed my ranch gate. What she didn't understand was that some things are worth fighting for. Home, family, freedom, the right to raise heritage cattle on agricultural land that you've worked and saved and dreamed of owning. And in the end, all her phone calls and citations and false reports couldn't change one simple truth. This is our land, these are our animals, and that gate will keep closing every single night, protecting what matters most. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be moved.